Sri Vishnu Sahasranama, 726, Anekamurti. Again, it's an easy name to understand. He of many forms. Eka means one, Aneka means not one, and is generally taken to mean many. Now this is in contradistinction to the Mayavadi misunderstanding of the previous name, Amurtiman, which they take to mean that he has no form. So then they have to interpret his having many forms as saying all the forms are illusory. So what's the specialty of that? That if it's all illusory, then we also have a form that's illusory, but you can say, oh no, Vishnu is very special because he has many forms which are illusory, but according to this logic, it's like having many zeros instead of one zero. It all adds up to zero. So Mayavadis squash them down again. Krishna Data Bharadvaj gives the derivation. Aneka bahavo murtaya akara svecha parigrihita yasya iti anekamurtihi. He who can assume many different forms as he desires, according to his will, is Anekamurti. Baladev Vidyabhushan, continuing with the theme that he previously gave, in the previous verse. Anekamurti specifically relates it to his Krishnas, simultaneously dwelling in 16,108 palaces in 16,108 forms. Now the yogis can expand themselves in up to maximum 9 forms. Krishna expands himself into 16,108 forms. But actually, there are many more forms. He expands himself as the Paramatma in the heart of every living being and in every atom. Andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam. He's within every living being, in the heart of every living being. So that's how many? Uncountable. But manifestly, and we'll get the next name, Avyakta, which means unmanifest. Watch out for that. Mayavadis are rubbing their hands. They like all these, I don't know what kind of perverse pleasure they get in trying to negate the reality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But manifestly he expanded himself in 16,108 forms and performed different activities, similar activities, but did different things at different times with different queens, and that's also part of his Bhaktavatsalyata. That name we'll be discussing fairly soon in Vishnu Sahasranama, that he is Bhaktavatsala. He's very loving and kind and protective and affectionate to his devotees. So one aspect of his Bhaktavatsaliata, if he's going to be the husband, then the wife wants to have the husband with her. Not just like in some harem. I think Srila Prabhupada gave the example of one Nizam, I believe in Lucknow, he also had some thousands of wives, but they never saw him. So they had the status of queens, but they didn't have any king to associate with, and they didn't have any sexual life either, because one king can only service so many queens. At least in this Kali Yuga, we hear of Chitraketu Maharaj, who had how many, 1 million queens, and tried with all of them, but couldn't get a son by any of them. So Krishna has so many queens, but he's able to live with them simultaneously. Baladev Vidyabhushan cites from the the 108 names of Lord Krishna from Brahmanda Purana. The name Shodasha Sri Sahasresha, the husband of 16,000 ladies, and often in Vedic parlance, not exact figures are given. Here 16,000 indicates 16,108. Just like we find many temples in South India, they're called 1,000 pillar halls, but they don't have exactly 1,000 pillars. Parashar Bhatta also gives the same example. He gave that chronologically before Baladev Vidyabhushan, about the Lord Krishna expanding himself into 16,108 forms for 16,000 to live simultaneously with 16,108 queens. And also when he came out into public to, for instance, every morning he would come out of his homes and proceed to the royal assembly, and all the forms would merge into one. So it is the same person. It's not different people. It's the same person. Parashar Bhatta, in this regard, quotes from Vishnu Purana, and we can very well do so from Bhagavad Purana. Much of the subject matter of Vishnu Purana parallels that of Srimad Bhagavatam. So many forms, and naturally with the many forms go many names, because especially when we take the forms of, for instance, Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, they all have different names because the forms are very different they're very different. And they have different qualities and different pastimes, so having many forms that gives rise to many names, manifest qualities, pastimes, and so on. Krishna, immeasurable. The Mayavadis say because immeasurable, therefore non-personal. Wrong. They got it wrong again. Shankaracharya takes this name to mean that he assumes various forms, particularly for the Shankara brings our attention to the fact that the Lord takes various forms for the protection of the world, which is true. Very, very much true. Krishna himself says as much in Bhagavad Gita, yada yada hi dharmasya glane bhavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. Whenever and wherever there is decline of dharma and an upsurge of adharma, I appear myself. Although that's true, we're not going to try and contradict Krishna, but at the same time, we should understand that there's an inner meaning which is more, or an inner purpose of Krishna which is more appreciable by his devotees. That he's not simply Vishnu, the maintainer of dharma, but he is the supreme loving Lord who comes especially to give pleasure to his devotees. An important point to understand here is that he takes forms at his will. That has already been discussed in this verse, but no harm to discuss it again, that his form that is not impelled by karma. Even though he has Krishna, it is a specific form. Rama, it is a specific form. It's not that Rama comes one time in a red form. Or it's not that Rama shows 1,000 arms. He has a specific form, and you can say that's fixed form, but again, it's all under his control. He personally why Ram is a fixed form, for that particular bhav and feeling and the way he reciprocates with his devotees, but it's Krishna who decides to take such a form. So it's not that he's fixed by there are any rules of the universe that are higher than him, but we can take it in the sense that, yes, if there is any rule which he follows, it's not exactly a rule, but it is it's impelling on him the love of his devotees. He responds to that. And therefore, as Rama, because he's playing a particular role, then he maintains a human-like role. Not that he's bound by that. Human-like and very much Rama Dharma Vigraha. He's the very form of Dharma. So for the protection of the world, he shows, he personifies perfect following of Dharma. And that's also for the protection of the world, because if people don't follow Dharma, then they're doomed, they're in great difficulty. So that's another major aspect of Vishnu being the preserver. He preserves Dharma not only by destroying the demons who usurp Dharma, but by giving the Dharma, by giving the Shastra, by manifesting himself in the hearts of dharmic people and impelling them to act in a dharmic way, and himself coming and setting the ideal example also. Anekamurti, we can stretch this to say that the demigods are also part of him. We're also part of him. Mamaivangsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha. All the living beings are parts of him. We are vibhinangsha. We are part of Krishna. So in that way, in one way we could say that Krishna expands himself as all living beings. Eko bahu syam, Chandoka says, that one became many. So in one sense, everything is a manifestation of Krishna, but still there's a difference between his svangsha, his own personal Vishnu forms, and the vibhinangsha, the jivas who expand from him. So the demigods are also considered parts of him. They're also jivas, but they have special functions to perform within the universe. So in the same way that the king is considered a representative of God, Naranam Chandaradhipam, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, among men I'm represented by the king. And then Acharyam Mang Vijaniyam, Krishna says, I manifest myself as the Acharya. The Acharya is also a human being. Brahmana is supposed to be Bhudeva, God on earth. So these are also forms of Krishna in the sense that Krishna manifests himself through them, his godly qualities, certain aspects of his godly qualities manifest through them. But at the same time, it's to be understood that by the principle of achintya bheda bhed, that we are parts of God. In one sense, we could say we are forms of him, but in a sense, not. In a very important sense also, not. Krishna adhishtam, that term is used in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that we should not give pain to every living being, knowing that Krishna is residing with each person. So Anekamurti can very broadly be said to extend to the demigods, and even more broadly to all living beings, and even more broadly to everything in existence, but especially to the Vishnu forms. But at the same time, even though there are many forms, we should always know that Krishna, this form, is most special of all. Srila Prabhupada, in one talk, explained this. He said, in his original form, he is Krishna, 2 hands, playing on the flute. That is his original form. The universal form is causal because Arjuna wanted to see it. Arjuna was a devotee, so Krishna showed him the universal form. That is not Krishna's actual form. Just like a person, he may dress himself as a king or something, but that is not his real appearance. If you really want to know who he is when he's being really who he is, without all social dressing in a very smart way as a businessman. If you want to see him just naturally as he is, you have to see him in his home. So Srila Prabhupada said Krishna's real form is Vrindavan, at home. That is his real form. And all other forms are expansion of his plenary portions. Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam. In the Brahma Samhita, Anantarupam. He can expand himself in millions and millions of forms, Anantarupam. But Advaita, but he's one. Advaita Achyuta. Achyuta means who never falls, infallible. So Krishna is infallible. His real form, in any form, he's not fallible, he's Achyuta. But his real form, Srila Prabhupada says, is Dvibhuj Murlida. Dvibhuj, two hands, and Murlida, having a flute in the hand. That is his real form. And this talk I'm quoting from is from the prayers of Kunti Devi. And Srila Prabhupada says, therefore, Kunti Devi is addressing Krishna. You have the universal form, but the form in which you are standing before me, that is your real form. So Krishna has many forms, and that brings to mind, of course, his deity forms. How many deity forms does he have? We can't count, even on this planet, what to speak of other planets. In Vrindavan alone, Srila Prabhupada says there are 5,000 temples of Krishna there. That would include every house, and that number must have increased since then. Even very, very important temples. We have the 7 main temples of Vrindavan, but there are so many other important and beautiful temples. And when you go to Vrindavan, there's so many. Just in Vrindavan town alone, there's so many important holy places. If there was somewhere else, you would give them great importance. But in Vrindavan, at every step, there are so many things of such great importance that just if you want to go about your day's business, you can. You have to just walk past a temple, which normally, let's put it this way. Say if we were going past a temple and someone said, well, here in this temple, there's the Dant Samadhi, the tooth of Gadadhar Pandit. You wouldn't just normally walk past it. Or here, you go in here and you can see the manuscript of Srimad Bhagavatam preserved, that Raghunath Bhatta used to read from. Or here, just walking on the street and then just pass Radharaman and you see the Gauranga deities. But normally you'd want to say such an important temple was in another place. Then you'd want to stop, spend time, at least stop and offer obeisances. But the thing is, there are so many temples that you just, like I say, if you have service to do, you work in Srila Prabhupada's service, then you may just walk past the temple and just bow your hand, or bow your head and put your hand, because so many things. So in Vrindavan alone, there's so many forms of the Lord, and he's prepared to expand himself more. Devotees worship deities. More deities are installed for worship. It shouldn't be taken cheaply. It should be known. What tends to happen, just like that example of the transcendental wonderland that is Vrindavan, even as manifested in this world, when you first go, the first 1 or 2 or 3 days, you're just awestruck, but then you just kind of get used to it, and familiarity breeds contempt. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada said, as I've heard, you should spend 3 days in Vrindavan, or 3 years. 3 days, then you can maintain your proper spirit of awe and reverence. Or 3 years, go there and do service. Do some service to this mission. Similarly with deities, there are so many deities, and we may tend to take them for granted, and even if we worship deities at home, we may tend to take them for granted and not really worship them. I'm very sad to say that I've seen in many homes, and I'm talking about not just Hindus, regular Hindus as you may say, but even in devotees' homes, they have deities, but they don't really look after them very nicely. Either they don't have time, or they're not that much bothered. I see someone gets up in the morning and they don't have time. They just put on their office clothes and then do some little puja or something. How can you do a puja in your office clothes and in 10 minutes? And maybe they do that just because I'm there and they're busy going off to work. Otherwise, maybe they wouldn't do that either. So if you're going to have deities, don't think, well, he has so many forms, so let someone else worship properly and I'll just keep it. And I'll do whatever I like, however I like, if I like. That's not the way. Krishna is always Krishna. He has many forms, but if you're going to worship the form, remember, this is Krishna. Not any less because he's expanded into so many forms. Hare Krishna.